Look around you. Watch the people in your office, the couples in a restaurant, the politicians on television, or the friends arguing at a dinner party. If you watch them closely, without listening to the specific words they are saying, you will witness a brutal, invisible war taking place right in front of your eyes. It is not a war of facts. It is not a war of logic or virtue or objective truth. It is a war of realities. In every single human interaction, from a casual passing greeting in a hallway to a multi-million-dollar corporate negotiation, there is a hidden psychological architecture being built, contested, and dismantled. Most people live their entire lives completely blind to this architecture. They wander through conversations believing that if they just have the right facts, the best argument, or the purest intentions, they will be heard, respected, and successful. They are wrong. They are the pawns on the chessboard, entirely unaware that the game is being played. The masters of the game, the elite negotiators, the master seducers, and yes, the manipulative sociopaths, understand a terrifying secret about human psychology. They understand that human beings do not react to reality. They react to the frame. What is a frame? A frame is the underlying context of an interaction. It is the invisible boundary that dictates the rules of engagement. It determines who is the prize to be won and who is the beggar seeking approval. It determines whose authority to ask questions and who bears the burden of answering them. It dictates whose emotional reality is dominant and whose emotional reality is subservient. When two people meet, their individual realities collide. The person with the stronger, more rigid psychological frame absorbs the reality of the other. The weaker frame is shattered, and the person holding it is instantly pulled into the dominant person's world. Think of a time you walked into a meeting feeling completely confident in your ideas, but within 3 minutes of talking to a specific executive, you suddenly found yourself stuttering, over-explaining, and desperately seeking their validation. Your facts didn't change, your idea didn't change, your intelligence didn't drop. What happened was that your frame was crushed. You were absorbed into their reality. You lost the psychological high ground before you even realized the battle had begun. In this masterclass, we are going to pull back the curtain on the dark psychology of conversational framing. We are going to expose the hidden mechanics of dominance and submission in human dialogue. You will learn the absolute laws of frame control. You will learn how to identify when someone is trying to force you into a submissive frame and exactly how to violently break it. You will learn the amused mastery technique to deflect aggression, the weaponization of questions to trap manipulators, and the takeaway tactic used by elite dealmakers. This is not a course on how to have polite conversation. This is a course on psychological survival and social dominance. If you are tired of being talked over, manipulated, dismissed, or constantly put on the defensive, it is time to stop playing by everyone else's rules. It is time to master the frame. Chapter 1: The Physics of the Frame and the Law of Reactivity. To master the frame, we must first understand its physics. In the realm of psychology and neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, framing is defined as the way a situation is presented and interpreted. The brain is an energy-saving machine. It does not want to analyze every single piece of raw data in a room. Instead, it looks for the overarching context, the frame, to tell it how to feel and how to behave. Imagine you are walking down the street and a man in ragged clothes runs up to you, waving his arms and yelling, "Stop, stop!" Your brain instantly applies a threat frame. Your adrenaline spikes. You brace for an attack or attempt to flee. Now imagine the exact same physical action, a man running toward you yelling "Stop," but this time the man is wearing a crisp blue police uniform. The raw data is the same. The volume is the same. The physical movement is the same, but your brain applies an entirely different frame, the authority frame. Instead of running away, you freeze, comply, and wait for instructions. The reality of the situation was completely dictated by the frame imposed upon it. In social interactions, frames are not dictated by uniforms. They are dictated by subtext, body language, and the underlying assumptions hidden within spoken words. When two people begin talking, a subconscious negotiation immediately occurs to determine whose frame will govern the interaction. This negotiation is rarely polite. It is a collision. So, how does the human brain determine who wins the collision? How do we subconsciously decide who holds the dominant frame and who holds the submissive frame? It all comes down to the most absolute, unbreakable law of social dynamics, the law of reactivity. The law of reactivity states, in any social interaction, the person who is reacting the most to the other person holds the weaker frame. Let me repeat that because it is the foundation of everything you will learn in this book. He who reacts loses. Power in a conversation is not about speaking the loudest. It is not about taking up the most airtime or having the most aggressive posture. In fact, people who shout and constantly interrupt are highly reactive. They are reacting to the silence, reacting to their own insecurity, and desperately fighting for attention. Their frame is incredibly weak. The dominant frame belongs to the person who is the least emotionally affected by the interaction. They are the immovable object. They are the sun, and everyone else is a planet forced to orbit their gravity. Let us look at a practical example of the law of reactivity in action. Imagine you are at a networking event. You walk up to a group of 3 people and introduce yourself. You tell a brief, mildly amusing story about how terrible the traffic was getting to the venue. Scenario A, the weak frame. You finish the story and the group just stares at you. Nobody laughs. An awkward silence falls over the circle. You feel a sudden spike of anxiety. Your amygdala registers the silence as social rejection. To fix the awkwardness, you immediately start talking faster. You laugh nervously at your own joke. You say, "Anyway, maybe it was just me. I guess I should have taken the highway. So what do you guys do?" In this scenario, your frame was completely shattered. The group offered you nothing but silence, and you reacted violently to it. You scrambled to fill the void. You sought their validation. You communicated to their subconscious minds, "Your silence dictates my emotional state. You are the judges, and I am the performer begging for applause." You are now the lowest status person in that circle. Scenario B, the dominant frame. You finish the story, and the group just stares at you in awkward silence. Nobody laughs. You do not flinch. You do not laugh nervously. You do not speak. You maintain soft, relaxed eye contact with the person directly across from you. You let the silence hang in the air for 3 agonizing seconds. You are perfectly comfortable in the void. Because you did not react to the awkwardness, the psychological pressure violently shifts back onto the group. The human brain hates unresolved tension. Because you are holding the dominant, unreactive frame, the other people in the circle will feel compelled to break the silence. Someone will nervously chuckle or quickly change the subject or ask you a question just to relieve the pressure. In scenario B, by doing absolutely nothing, you established the dominant frame. You communicated, "My emotional state is independent of your validation. I am comfortable with tension. You must adapt to me." To master the frame, you must become hyper-aware of your own reactivity. Every time you over-explain a mistake, every time you apologize when an apology isn't warranted, every time you laugh at a joke that was not funny just to be polite, you are bleeding power. You are surrendering your frame. The master of the dark psychology of communication builds an emotional fortress. They hear the words of others, but they do not allow those words to penetrate their nervous system. They respond, but they never react. Chapter 2. The Judge and the Suitor, Dismantling the Trial. Now that we understand the law of reactivity, we must examine the specific types of frames people use to establish dominance. The most common, pervasive, and insidious power dynamic in human society is what psychologists call the judge and suitor frame. You encounter this frame every single day. You see it in job interviews, in sales pitches, in romantic dates, and in the dynamic between toxic bosses and their employees. Here is the underlying architecture of the judge and suitor frame. The judge holds the perceived value. Their role is to evaluate, critique, accept, or reject. They ask the probing questions. They sit back. They hold the power of validation. The suitor seeks the value. Their role is to perform, impress, justify, and qualify themselves. They answer the questions. They lean forward. They desperately crave validation. The trap of the judge and suitor frame is that it is often culturally accepted as normal. When you walk into a job interview, society tells you that the hiring manager is the judge and you are the suitor begging for the job. When you go on a first date with someone highly attractive, society tells you they are the prize, the judge, and you must win them over, the suitor. But masters of conversational framing refuse to accept societal defaults. They know that whoever accepts the role of the suitor automatically surrenders the interaction. The burden of proof. The mechanism that powers the judge and suitor frame is called the burden of proof. In a court of law, the prosecution has the burden of proof. They must present the evidence to justify their case. In a conversation, the person who holds the burden of proof is the suitor. They are the ones doing all the heavy lifting. They are expending energy to prove their worth. Manipulative people, narcissists, and aggressive negotiators are experts at forcing the burden of proof onto you without you realizing it. They do this by issuing shit tests, a term from evolutionary psychology describing a subconscious test designed to gauge your confidence and frame strength. Let's look at a corporate example. You are a consultant pitching a marketing strategy to a CEO. You finish your presentation. The CEO leans back, crosses his arms, frowns, and says, "I've seen this exact same strategy pitched by 3 other firms this year. It looks basic. Why should I believe your agency can execute this any better than the guys we fired last month?" The CEO has just violently imposed the judge frame. He has handed you the burden of proof. The amateur reaction, accepting the suitor frame, your heart rate spikes, you lean forward over the table, you speak faster. "Well, sir, our analytics team uses a proprietary algorithm that is actually much more advanced than our competitors. And if you look at the case study on page 4, you'll see our ROI was 20% higher. We also guarantee a dedicated account manager." You are dancing like a monkey for a peanut. You accepted the premise that you are on trial. You accepted the burden of proof. Even if your facts are perfect, the CEO now views you as a subordinate. He owns your reality. The frame flip, breaking the judge. To master the dark psychology of communication, you must learn how to execute the frame flip. When someone attempts to put you on trial, you must ruthlessly and seamlessly bat the burden of proof back onto them. You must refuse the premise of their question. You do this through a combination of physical stillness, the strategic pause, and the counter-qualifying question. Let us replay the exact same scenario with the CEO. CEO, why should I believe your agency can execute this any better than the guys we fired last month? The master reaction, the frame flip. First, control the physical reality. Do not lean forward. Do not break eye contact. Keep your face completely relaxed. Execute a 2-second strategic pause to let his aggression dissipate in the dead air. Then you speak with a low, slow, downward inflection. I can't answer that because I don't know why your last agency failed. Pause. Tell me, what internal bottlenecks does your executive team have that prevented the last strategy from being executed properly? Notice the absolute devastation of this psychological maneuver. Refusing the premise. By saying, "I can't answer that," you explicitly refuse to accept the burden of proof. You refuse to justify yourself. The counterattack. You took his accusation, that your agency is weak, and reframed it as his failing, that his internal team has bottlenecks. Taking the judge role. By ending with a command disguised as a question, "Tell me, what internal bottlenecks does your executive team have that prevented the last strategy from being executed properly?" You forced the CEO to start explaining and justifying his own company's failures to you. In 10 seconds, without raising your voice or acting unprofessionally, you ripped the judge robe off his shoulders and put it on your own. You established that you are the prize, a highly selective expert diagnosing a patient, not a desperate salesman begging for a check. Practice Application 1, the Why You drill. Toxic people use the suitor frame constantly in personal relationships. A manipulative partner might say, "You're always working. You obviously don't care about this relationship as much as I do. What are you going to do to fix it?" They are making themselves the judge and forcing you to scramble, apologize, and prove your love. For the next week, practice radical awareness of the burden of proof. Whenever someone asks you a question that demands you justify your actions, your intelligence, or your worth, stop. Do not answer the question directly. Instead, pivot, agree and amplify, or ask a question that forces them to qualify themselves to you. Manipulative partner, what are you going to do to fix this relationship? You, the master frame, I am dedicated to building a healthy partnership, but a healthy partnership requires two emotionally regulated adults. How are we going to improve our communication so these accusations stop? You take their aggressive energy, step out of the way, and let them fall forward under their own weight. You never accept the burden of proof. You never stand on trial in another person's courtroom. Chapter 3. The Amused Mastery Frame, Defeating the Aggressor. Now the tone becomes slightly lighter, yet incredibly dangerous. This is the realm of psychological invulnerability. Speak with a hint of a knowing smile. If the judge and suitor frame is a battle of logic and qualification, the next frame we must master is a battle of pure emotional control. It is the ultimate defense mechanism against direct aggression, insults, passive-aggressive remarks, and blatant disrespect. It is called the Amused Mastery Frame. When a person aggressively insults you or tries to humiliate you in front of others, their goal is to rupture your emotional state. They want to see you bleed. They are fishing for a reaction. They want you to become visibly angry, because anger is a loss of control. They want you to look hurt, because hurt implies they have power over your self-esteem. Or they want you to aggressively insult them back, which pulls you down into their chaotic, low-status reality. If you fight them, they win. If you shrink, they win. The Amused Mastery Frame bypasses the fight entirely. It relies on a profound psychological truth. You cannot fight someone who genuinely finds your aggression entertaining. The concept of amused mastery is treating the hostile adult in front of you exactly how a patient, loving parent treats a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. When a toddler screams, cries, and kicks the floor because they can't have a piece of candy, the parent doesn't start screaming back. The parent doesn't try to logically debate the toddler about the nutritional value of sugar. The parent doesn't feel their ego threatened by a 3-year-old. The parent simply stands there, completely unbothered, perhaps smiling slightly at the absurdity of the situation, and waits for the toddler to exhaust themselves. The parent possesses amused mastery. They are so far above the toddler in the hierarchy of power that the toddler's aggression is meaningless. You must apply this exact same psychological framework to toxic adults, aggressive negotiators, and bullies.
The execution of amused mastery. Let's visualize a high-tension scenario. You are at a dinner party with a group of friends. One of the guests, a deeply insecure man who perceives you as a threat to his social status, decides to take a shot at you. Across the table, in front of everyone, he says loudly, "I saw the car you drove up in. A used Honda? I thought you were supposed to be doing well with that new business of yours. Guess things are a bit tight, huh?" The table goes dead silent. Everyone is looking at you, waiting for your reaction. The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife. The reactive frame, the failure. You feel the heat rise in your face. Your ego is bruised. You immediately snap back. Actually, the business is doing great. I just don't feel the need to waste money on a depreciating asset like a flashy car just to impress people like you. You think you won the exchange because you delivered a logical comeback, but you lost the frame entirely. You proved to the entire table that his words deeply affected you. You showed that you care about his opinion. You engaged in his petty, low-status battle. The amused mastery frame. the devastation. The insult lands. The table goes silent. You do not frown. You do not break eye contact with him. You execute the physical protocol of amused mastery. The Duchenne smile. Let a genuine, warm smile reach your eyes. This is critical. Do not smirk arrogantly. A smirk is a defensive reaction that signals contempt and will escalate the fight. A genuine smile signals absolute, unshakable safety. The slow movement. You take a slow sip of your drink, completely unhurried. The verbal deflection. You speak with a warm, chuckling, downward inflection. You do not defend the car. You do not attack him. You simply acknowledge his bizarre behavior. You, chuckling softly, "You are incredibly focused on my transportation tonight, David. It's fascinating." And then you simply turn your head and resume your previous conversation with the person next to you, completely ignoring him for the rest of the evening. The psychological annihilation. The effect of amused mastery on an aggressor is psychological annihilation. You completely denied them the emotional reaction they were craving. By smiling warmly and calling their behavior fascinating, you framed their aggressive insult as a bizarre, slightly embarrassing psychological quirk that you find mildly entertaining. You elevated yourself to the status of a scientist observing a confused insect. You did not have to defend your wealth. You did not have to insult his character. By refusing to engage in the combat on their terms, you proved that his reality is so insignificant to you that it doesn't even warrant a serious response. The rest of the table will instantly recognize the power dynamic. David will look petty, insecure, and socially awkward. You will look like an unshakable, hyper-confident force of nature. Practice application 2. The emotional detachment drill. Amused mastery is not a technique. It is a worldview. It requires you to genuinely detach your ego from the words of other people. To practice this, you must build an internal psychological firewall. Whenever someone offers a passive-aggressive remark, an insult, or an unsolicited critique, your first mental action must be to silently categorize their behavior. Say to yourself internally, "This person is attempting to project their own insecurity onto me. They are throwing a tantrum. It has nothing to do with me." Once you mentally categorize them as a toddler, the urge to defend yourself evaporates. You can smile your Duchenne smile, offer a neutral observation like, "What an interesting thing to say out loud," and watch them scramble to piece their shattered frame back together. Chapter 4. The Weaponization of Syntax, How Questions Control Reality. Narrator. The pacing slows. The tone is deeply analytical, focusing on the microscopic details of language. Speak like a linguist explaining a deadly spell. We have discussed the grand strategy of frames. Now we must examine the tactical weaponry used to enforce them. We must look at the grammar of control. The structure of your sentences dictates the structure of your power. The fundamental rule of conversational framing is this: the person who asks questions controls the direction of the reality. Statements provide information. Questions demand compliance. When you make a statement, you are placing an idea on the table for the other person to evaluate. They can accept it, reject it, or ignore it. When you ask a question, you are reaching into the other person's brain and forcing them to expend cognitive energy to formulate an answer. You are directing their mental focus. You are imposing a specific set of parameters on their reality. In interrogations, negotiations, and manipulative relationships, whoever asks the most questions holds the dominant frame. The illusion of choice, the double bind. One of the most potent dark psychology techniques regarding questions is the double bind, also known as the illusion of choice. A standard question asks for an opinion. Do you want to sign this contract today? The other person has the freedom to say yes or no. A double bind is a question constructed so that no matter which option the person chooses, they are complying with your frame. It bypasses the conscious defense mechanism of the brain by offering a choice, making the victim feel in control while masking the underlying command. Salesman, standard, are you interested in buying the premium software package today? Allows the no response. Salesman, double bind, based on your needs, we can begin the integration of the premium software on Tuesday, or would Thursday afternoon work better for your IT team? Notice the architecture of the double bind. The question is not if they are buying the software. The premise that the software is already purchased is baked into the foundation of the sentence. The only choice offered is the day of implementation. The victim's brain gets so distracted trying to calculate their schedule for Tuesday versus Thursday that it completely forgets to object to the sale itself. Defeating the interrogator. The Socratic pivot. Because questions are the ultimate tool of control, toxic personalities and dominant individuals will often use rapid-fire questioning to trap you in a submissive frame. They will cross-examine you. Toxic manager. Why is this report late? Did you not understand the brief? Are you incapable of managing your time, or do you just not care about this project? If you attempt to answer these questions, you lose. You are accepting the premise of their frame, that you are incompetent and lazy. To defeat an aggressive interrogator, you must never answer their questions linearly. You must use the Socratic pivot. You answer a question with a question that reframes the entire interaction. Toxic manager, why is this report late? Are you incapable of managing your time? You, the Socratic pivot. Execute a 2-second pause. Speak calmly with downward inflection. The report required data from the engineering team, which was delayed. Given that we both want this data to be accurate rather than rushed, how would you prefer I prioritize accuracy versus arbitrary deadlines moving forward? You did not apologize. You provided a factual, one-sentence statement of reality and then immediately weaponized a question back at them. Look at the trap you just set. You framed the late report as a pursuit of accuracy and the deadline as arbitrary. You then forced the manager to answer a question that puts them in a double bind. They either have to publicly state they prefer rushed, inaccurate work, making them look foolish, or they have to agree with your prioritization, validating your action. You took the gun out of their hand, reloaded it with their own words, and pointed it directly at their forehead. This is the lethal power of the Socratic pivot. Practice application 3, the interrogative diet. Most people speak in statements and end their statements with upward inflections seeking validation. To master the frame, go on an interrogative diet for 3 days. In your professional meetings and personal negotiations, force yourself to cut your statements in half. Make a single, powerful declarative statement and immediately follow it with an open-ended how or what question that forces the other party to work. Instead of saying, I think we should delay the launch because the marketing materials aren't ready and I'm worried about the conversion rates, weak, statement-heavy, and anxious, say, the marketing materials are not to our standard. What is the specific logistical impact if we push the launch back 48 hours to ensure maximum conversion? Make them do the cognitive labor. Make them operate inside your parameters. Command the reality of the room through the syntax of your sentences.
Chapter 5. Frame Disruptors. The Dark Arts of Pricing and Time. We have covered defense. Now we move to the advanced offensive tactics of conversational framing. These are the frame disruptors, psychological mechanisms used to artificially inflate your perceived value and shatter the confidence of the person across from you. These techniques are heavily utilized by elite sales professionals, master negotiators, and those skilled in the psychology of attraction. At the core of these techniques is a singular, unyielding philosophy, the prize frame. The fundamental law of human economics, whether dealing with money, time, or relationships, is scarcity.
Humans are biologically hardwired to desire that which is rare, difficult to obtain, and highly sought after by others. We despise that which is abundant, desperate, and easily available. If you enter a negotiation, a job interview, or a date projecting the energy that you need the outcome, you are broadcasting abundance. You are cheap. You have handed the other person the dominant frame because they possess the thing you desperately want. To master the prize frame, you must completely re-engineer your internal psychology. You must act, speak, and negotiate from the fundamental belief that you are the rarest commodity in the room. You are the prize. They must earn you. The time constraint frame. The most effective way to establish the prize frame and disrupt an opponent's reality is by aggressively managing the most valuable resource on Earth, time. Weak communicators give their time away freely. They linger, they let meetings drag on, they wait eagerly for responses. This signals low status. Master communicators use the time constraint frame. They weaponize time to create artificial scarcity and urgency. Imagine you are attending a high-level networking event. You spot a key industry player you want to connect with. The amateur approach, you walk up, introduce yourself, and start pitching your business. You talk for 10 minutes, desperately trying to keep their attention while their eyes dart around the room looking for an escape. You have zero power. The master approach, the time constraint, you walk up to the key player. Before you even introduce yourself properly, you deploy the time constraint. I only have exactly 2 minutes before I have to jump on an international call, but I wanted to quickly introduce myself. I read your recent white paper on market trends. Notice the psychological disruption. By instantly establishing that your time is scarce, you neutralize their defense mechanisms. They don't have to worry about how to get away from you because you have already announced you are leaving. More importantly, you established a massive status indicator. You are so busy, so in demand, that you can only spare 2 minutes for them. Because human beings want what they cannot have, the moment you tell them you are leaving, their psychological desire to keep you in the conversation skyrockets. You have flipped the dynamic. Instead of you chasing their attention, their brain is now scrambling to find a way to maximize the 2 minutes you granted them. When the 2 minutes are up, you must ruthlessly enforce the frame. Cut the conversation off, even if it is incredibly going well. As I said, I have to take this call, but this was a fascinating start. Let's schedule 10 minutes next Tuesday to finish this thought. Take care. You walk away, leaving them completely off balance, craving more of your time, and firmly believing that you are the most valuable person they met that night. You owned the frame, from start to finish. The takeaway, the nuclear option of negotiation. In high-stakes business negotiations or intense personal conflicts, the ultimate assertion of the prize frame is the dark psychology tactic known as the takeaway. The takeaway is the willingness to completely withdraw your offer, your presence, or your attention the absolute second you are disrespected or your terms are not met. Most people negotiate from a place of fear, the fear of losing the deal, the fear of losing the relationship. Manipulators can smell this fear. They will slowly chip away at your boundaries, demanding more concessions, lowering their offers, or treating you poorly, confident that you will not leave because you are too invested. The takeaway shatters this illusion. Imagine you are a freelancer negotiating a contract. The client has agreed to your rate, but at the final meeting, they suddenly say, "We reviewed the budget and we need to cut your fee by 20%, but we promise there will be more work in the future." They are testing your frame. They are applying the judge and suitor dynamic, demanding you accept less because they hold the money. If you negotiate, complain, or ask to meet in the middle, you lose. You validate their tactic. The execution of the takeaway, you execute the strategic pause, absolute silence for 3 seconds. You do not look angry, you look profoundly disappointed. You slowly close your notebook, you place your pen in your pocket.
I understand your budget constraints. Unfortunately, my rates are a reflection of the exact value and speed I bring to the market, and they are non-negotiable. It sounds like my firm isn't the right fit for your current financial situation. I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck with the project. You walk toward the door. You walk toward the door. The psychological devastation of the takeaway is immense. You did not argue. You did not get emotional. You simply removed the prize, you, from the table. Because of the psychological principle of loss aversion, which dictates that humans feel the pain of losing something twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining it, the client's brain will experience a sudden, violent panic. They thought they were in control, and suddenly the deal is walking out the door. In 8 out of 10 scenarios, before you touch the handle of the door, they will stop you. They will backpedal. They will suddenly find the budget. And even if they let you walk out the door, you still won. You preserved your frame. You protected your psychological boundaries. You proved to yourself that you are not desperate. And the next time you enter a negotiation, the absolute unshakable confidence of knowing you are capable of walking away will radiate from you like a physical force. Chapter 6. Defeating the Gaslighter, Neutralizing Hostile Realities. We have explored how to establish dominant frames in negotiations and social settings, but there is a dark, highly dangerous category of human behavior where frame control is not just a tactic for success, it is the absolute prerequisite for psychological survival. We must address the toxic personalities, the manipulators, the chronic bullies, the covert narcissists, and the gaslighters. If you have ever worked for a narcissistic boss or survived a relationship with an emotionally abusive partner, you know the profound, exhausting damage they can inflict. They drain your energy. They make you question your own sanity. They turn every interaction into a maze of funhouse mirrors. Toxic personalities do not use frames to negotiate business deals. They use frames to completely overwrite your reality. This is the definition of gaslighting. A gaslighter imposes a hostile frame that insists your memory is wrong, your emotions are invalid, and your perception of reality is broken. Gaslighter. I never said that. You're being overly sensitive again. You always blow things out of proportion. You're acting crazy. If you attempt to argue with a gaslighter with logic, facts, or emotional pleas, you have stepped into a catastrophic trap. Narcissists and gaslighters do not feed on logic. They do not care about objective truth. They feed entirely on your emotional reaction. Pathologists call this narcissistic supply. When you cry, when you yell, when you frantically pull out text messages to prove you are right, you are proving that they have absolute, godlike control over your emotional state. You cannot out-argue a toxic frame. You cannot convince a gaslighter to see your reality. There is only one way to defeat a psychological vampire. You must starve them to death. You must deploy the ultimate defensive frame, the gray rock method combined with frame refusal.
The gray rock protocol. The concept of gray rocking is to make your internal and external reality as incredibly uninteresting, unresponsive, and emotionally flat as a boring gray rock sitting on the ground. When you combine this emotional detachment with the absolute refusal to accept their false premises, you build an impenetrable fortress around your mind. Imagine you are forced to co-parent with a toxic, manipulative ex-partner. You are doing a drop-off and they immediately try to instigate a fight to assert dominance. Toxic ex. You're late again. You are incredibly disorganized. It's pathetic how you can't even manage a simple schedule. The kids deserve better. Your biological instinct is to fiercely defend your character, to point out that there was traffic, or to scream that they were late 3 times last week. If you do any of those things, you feed the vampire. You accept the frame that your character is up for debate. Instead, you deploy the gray rock frame refusal. Step 1, the emotional disconnect. instantly remind yourself, this person is psychologically unwell. Their words are not a reflection of reality, they are a manifestation of their own sickness. I will not drink their poison. Step 2, the physical freeze. Do not break eye contact, but use the soft focus stare. Relax the muscles around your eyes. Imagine you are looking through them, watching a boring documentary playing on the back of their skull. Show absolutely zero anger, zero hurt, and zero defense. Become a statue. Step 3, the ultimate refusal, the single phrase. You do not argue the facts, you do not justify your lateness, you simply refuse the frame with a cold, monotonous, downward inflection. I do not accept that characterization. The children's bags are on the porch. I will pick them up on Sunday at 5 p.m. Then you turn around, get in your car, and leave. The devastation of non-reaction. The psychological impact of this sequence on a toxic personality is devastating and starving. You completely denied them their narcissistic supply. You gave them no anger to feed on, no defense to tear down. By saying, I do not accept that characterization, you explicitly rejected their reality without bothering to offer an alternative one for them to attack. You treated their aggressive insult as if it were a boring, irrelevant piece of background noise. Because narcissists are deeply, profoundly insecure beneath their bravado, your total lack of emotional reaction will deeply unsettle them. It signals that their magic no longer works on you. They cannot control the frame, they cannot control you. When you consistently apply the gray rock method and frame refusal to a bully, a fascinating thing happens in the psychology of the dynamic. They will try a few more times, escalating their behavior, the extinction burst, to try and force the reaction they crave. But when they continually hit a wall of absolute emotional nothingness, they will eventually stop. They will realize that attacking you yields no emotional reward. You are a dry well. They will abandon the attack and go search for an easier, more reactive target to feed their ego. You did not have to fight them to defeat them. You defeated them with the crushing, immovable gravity of the void. You held your frame, and their reality shattered against it. Conclusion: the architect of reality. You have reached the end of the psychological matrix. We began this journey by exposing the invisible battlefield of human interaction. We dismantled the myth that facts and logic dictate success, and we proved that the human mind ultimately surrenders to the strongest frame. You have learned the physics of power. You understand the absolute law of reactivity, that the person who reacts the most holds the least power. You know how to identify the judge and suitor dynamic, and you have the tactical tools to rip the burden of proof off your shoulders and hand it back to the aggressor. You have mastered the emotional detachment of amused mastery, learning to treat hostility not as a threat, but as a fascinating absurdity. You have learned to weaponize syntax, using the double bind and the Socratic pivot to control the parameters of reality. You have stepped into the dark arts of the prize frame, using the time constraint and the terrifying power of the takeaway to manufacture absolute scarcity. And you know how to build the psychological fortress of the gray rock, starving toxic personalities of the emotional supply they need to survive. You are no longer the pawn on the chessboard, blindly reacting to the moves of others, apologizing for taking up space, and constantly fighting to justify your own existence. You are the architect of reality. You set the rules of engagement. But with this immense psychological knowledge comes a profound ethical burden. The techniques you have learned in this masterclass are not parlor tricks. They are psychological weapons. They bypass the logical filtering systems of the human brain and interact directly with the primal emotional core of the nervous system. When you use a double bind, when you execute a takeaway, when you impose a dominant frame, you are actively manipulating the perception, the adrenaline, and the reality of the people around you.
Like any weapon, frame control is entirely amoral. It does not possess a conscience. It is simply a mechanism of power. If you use these tools to bully the weak, to gaslight your partners, or to extract unfair advantages from those who trust you, you will become the very toxic personality we studied how to defeat. You will become a psychological vampire, and while you may win the immediate negotiation, you will ultimately die 1,000 deaths of isolation, surrounded by people who obey you out of fear but harbor a deep secret hatred for your presence. True power, charismatic, world-bending, legendary power, is using these dark arts to protect the light. You use frame control to protect your team from a toxic manager. You use the amused mastery frame to diffuse a tense situation and prevent a physical fight. You use the prize frame to demand the salary you absolutely deserve, preventing a corporation from exploiting your labor. You use the immense gravity of your unshakable reality to create a safe, stable harbor for those who are lost in the chaos of their own minds. You must view yourself as a martial artist of the mind. You possess lethal capability, but you keep the sword sheathed until it is absolutely necessary to draw it. You understand the frame, you know its weight, you know its terrors, and you know its profound beauty. Now it is time to step back into the chaotic, loud, terrified world. The next time you walk into a boardroom, or step onto a stage, or face down an enemy, do not rush, do not panic, do not let their reality consume you. Anchor your feet to the earth, look them directly in the eyes, breathe deep into your stomach. Do not react. Let them collide with your silence. Let them feel the magnetic pull of your unbothered calm. Let them desperately seek your validation. And when you finally do open your mouth, set the frame, dictate the reality, and change the world. Thank you for embarking on this intense psychological journey with quick audiobooks. If mastering the dark arts of conversational framing has shifted your paradigm, ensure you subscribe, like, and return for more uncompromising deep dives into the hidden mechanics of power, influence, and the human mind. Until next time, hold your frame, command the reality, and stay powerful.